question about this warning from a coroner in West London has warned that more babies could die unless the government introduces regulation of non-therapeutic male circumcision. We'll get more detail on precisely what that means in a moment. This is after the awful death of a 6-month-old baby boy in West London. Mohammed Abdisamad was circumcised on the 12th of February back in 2023. So this investigation has gone on for a long time by a circumciser, so described, who had been recommended to his parents and requested by them to perform the procedure on their son. This is detail from the West London coroner's report. The little boy began showing symptoms of illness 3 to 4 days later and was taken to hospital on the 19th of February. This is again back in 2023, but died on the same day. Absolutely tragic. He was taken to Hillingdon Hospital by ambulance, where he went into cardiorespiratory arrest and was pronounced dead just before midnight. A jury inquest, which concluded in October of last year, 2025, found the medical cause of death to be an invasive streptococcus pyogenes infection following male circumcision. And during the inquest, the evidence revealed matters giving rise to concern. Dr. Van Dellen wrote in this report, this coroner's report from December, the very end of December, just gone. He says, in my opinion, there is a risk that future deaths could occur unless action is taken. Let's get a sense from my guest, Alejandro Sanchez, human rights lead at the National Secular Society and former NHS doctor, as to what, if any, regulation there is around this and who can and should carry out non-therapeutic male circumcision, if indeed it should be carried out at all. Alejandro, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks very much for having me, Sheila.
First of all, let's describe, if you would mind helping me, what is non-therapeutic male circumcision?
Yeah, very happy to provide a definition, but perhaps I could just first express my deepest condolences to Mohammed's family, and perhaps say that we know that parents, when they decide to circumcise their children, they do so with love. They want what is best for their children, so nothing in this conversation is about blaming parents, but rather just trying to raise awareness about some of the potential harms of this procedure. Okay. So yes, turning to non-therapeutic circumcision. So therapeutic circumcisions are those that are performed for an urgent medical reason. So for example, pathological phimosis is a condition affecting the foreskin where it cannot be retracted due to scarring or infection. So that's an urgent medical reason for an individual to be circumcised. And the National Secular Society, which I work for, has absolutely no objection to that. Non-therapeutic circumcisions are those that are not performed for an urgent medical reason. So that could be for religious reasons. So those are largely in the UK performed within the Jewish and Islamic communities. There's also the sort of US-style prophylactic circumcisions, and then in some cultures it can be a rite of passage. So in South Africa it's performed during adolescent years, and there's actually been 41 deaths in South Africa during this most recent initiation season.
And when you say a prophylactic, that the US does it as a prophylactic, what's the aim there?
So in the US, I think circumcisions are performed for cultural reasons. So that's quite a complicated conversation, actually. But they're claimed health benefits, they're claimed hygiene benefits, but there are also some sort of darker historical basis for the rise of circumcision in the US. So John Harvey Kellogg of Kellogg's cereal fame was very anti-masturbation. And he was a big advocate of circumcision on that basis.
And when it comes to the regulation, the reading between the lines of what the coroner says, it looks like there isn't any, really.
Yeah, so it's quite an unusual situation here in the UK. So doctors who perform circumcisions are subject to the regular regulations, so that of the General Medical Council and the Care Quality Commission. But anyone else can legally perform a circumcision with no regulation whatsoever. So you could legally perform a circumcision, Sheila. Any of your listeners could. And there is no requirement for medical training. There's no requirement for proven expertise. This was confirmed by the government in the House of Lords last year. We've long argued that this legal arrangement is endangering the lives of children, as has been borne out in this tragic case. But this is not new. I mean, we've had 3 deaths of boys since 2009.
In the UK?
Potentially,
in the UK?
In the UK, yeah, absolutely. Goodluck Corberg, Celia Noah Mouet, and Angelo Afori-Minta. There are potentially more. We've requested data from the Office of National Statistics, and they've identified potentially 7 deaths linked to circumcision since 2001, but we haven't been able to get any specifics on this. And there's actually been 2 ritual circumcisers who've been convicted of serious crimes against boys just this year. So in January, Mohammed Siddiqui was jailed for 5 years for crimes including actual bodily harm and child cruelty. He was actually a former doctor who'd been struck off in 2015, but had been perfectly legally allowed to continue to circumcise boys as a layperson. And what's really remarkable about that case is that he'd been struck off the medical register for performing dangerous and cruel circumcisions.
But was then free to do this, yeah.
Absolutely. So it's really perverse that someone who should be subject to additional scrutiny was actually subject to less.
There are, in my mind's eye anyway, as I'm listening to you, there are shades of the beauty industry about this, where you can set up in your front room and give Botox kind of thing, which again doesn't feel particularly wise to me. But I guess the difference here, I suppose, is that although Botox is cultural reasons, isn't it? Not religious reasons, but certainly cultural reasons. With your role as in the National Secular Society, and that you are a former NHS doctor as well, is your argument that no religious or cultural circumcision of baby boys, should take place? I had a conversation a week or so ago about FGM,
yes.
and there are certain differences at play, I would argue, but still, and I said at the time, this wasn't something I knew a great deal about.
Yeah.
So it's good to have the conversation with you. Would you argue that that the same should apply, and it simply shouldn't be happening to baby boys or teenage boys?
So, yeah, our position is that circumcision as a surgery is inherently dangerous, and it should only be performed by doctors, and when it comes to children, only with medical necessity. So we think the decision about medically unnecessary circumcision should be deferred until the individual is old enough to decide for themselves, based on their own values. And I did listen in on that interview you performed with Nimco last week, and she actually gave a very powerful interview in 2001 talking about male circumcision, and she said she despised it, and she actually said, if we're going to stop FGM, it may be that we have to stop male circumcision in order to do so, because it's certainly my understanding that there's no culture that practices FGM that does not also practice male circumcision. And I suppose that stands to reason in one sense. If you think it's acceptable to cut a boy's genitals, then perhaps why not a girl's too? And
do you accept, with your medical hat on, do you accept that there are clearly there are dangers, or baby boys wouldn't be dying, but that there are clinical, physical and sexual experience differences in the 2 types of circumcision in many cases?
So within FGM there's a spectrum of practices, and we at the National Secular Society repudiate all of them, and they range from the sort of most invasive forms of infibulation and clitoral excision to less invasive, but I would still say deplorable practices, which involve perhaps nicking a girl's clitoris with a needle to extract a single drop of blood. And there was an interesting court case here in the UK in 2015 in the Family Division of the High Court, where a judge compared the 2 practices, actually, this clitoral nicking and male circumcision, and he actually concluded that male circumcision is more invasive, and he said that both practices constitute significant harm under the Children Act 1989. In terms of the sexual effects, those of some forms of FGM can be profound.
Yeah.
When it comes to circumcision, some men will experience sexual effects. But if you go on the NHS website and you look at some of the complications of circumcision, it does list permanent reduction in sensation in the head of the penis, particularly during sex. And that is backed up by guidance from the British Association of Urological Surgeons. And that's, sort of new guidance, but it's not a new idea. The Jewish sage Maimonides
do you think...
I've just been talking about this since the 12th century.
Yeah, because when we were not on air, yeah. Do you think there's a reluctance to talk about male circumcision as being wrong in the way that we are now more comfortable about talking about female circumcision as being wrong? There is absolutely a reluctance to talk about this. And I think that's because, in contrast to FGM, circumcision has a long history in this country. So it's perhaps we're sort of inured to some of the potential harms and human rights arguments that would militate against it. And I think perhaps the most powerful one in that sense is, each individual is enshrined within an individual right to freedom of religion or belief. And non-therapeutic circumcision is imposing a parent's cultural or religious views upon the genitals of a non-consenting child. Yeah, it's one thing for parents to raise their children in their faith, and that's normal behaviour. You might not think so if you're in the National Secular Society, but anyway, it can be perfectly harmless behaviour. But to actually physically change their bodies, the intimate parts of their bodies, is a different question, isn't it? What strikes me, to follow on from my question about a reluctance to talk about male circumcision, is what this coroner has said a sort of turning point in some ways in how we've discussed this, or is it just me seeing it that way because I wasn't as familiar with it?
Well, the government. So in the Al-Azawi case that I mentioned a bit earlier, the judge in his sentencing remarks said that regulation and safeguards and protections needed to be introduced as a matter of urgency, and he actually underlined that.
What year was that?
That was in 2025 in January. Yeah, and then there was a subsequent case in July where the judge said the same thing, that this is entirely unregulated. And actually in Al-Azawi there was actually family members of victims who were shocked at the lack of regulation and called for things to change. But we've certainly made the government aware of this, and they've told us as recently as November that they have no plans on doing anything about this.
Well, this coroner's report is going to be sent to the Department of Health and Social Care, which is, I'm sure, pro forma, and that would happen anyway, and to the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. Do you expect there to be more discussion of this year? I imagine there will be.
I should hope so. My understanding is that they have 56 days to reply.
That's right.
But this certainly isn't new on their radar. When you mentioned the Botox earlier, and the government announced a crackdown on some unregulated cosmetic procedures over the summer, we certainly raised the comparisons about the lack of regulation with them back then. So this should not be news to them. And we actually called on Parliament's Health and Social Care Committee to launch a parliamentary inquiry into this in April.
Right. Well, we'll see where that goes. This is quite strident, isn't it, from the coroner? But as you point out, there have been judge reports before. Alejandro, thank you. Good to talk to you. Alejandro Sanchez, Human Rights Lead at the National Secular Society, former NHS doctor. Let's head straight to Switzerland.